We've had probably the hardest 36 hours in modern history for the Jewish people, certainly in recent modern history. Those of you who know me well know that I spend many hours preparing any shiur that I give in public because I don't believe it's fair to ask you to invest your time in something in which I have not invested an enormous amount of time and thought to prepare it for you and give it over to you in the way that I think is best. And yet, in preparing this conversation I wanted to have with you, because it's a conversation, it's not a shiur, the more I tried to prepare it, the more I found myself at a loss for words. And so I thought that I would just speak what's on my mind, speak what's in my heart, and hope that from what I share with you, there might be thoughts and ideas that might help you through this difficult time in terms of creating a framework, a perspective, some kind of a sense of what am I meant to be doing? What am I meant to be thinking? How am I meant to be feeling about this turmoil, this confusion, this sadness, this devastation, this worry, this fear that we feel? And of course, the first thing is to acknowledge the sadness, to feel the sadness. The second is to have in our minds tefillot, prayers for those who have been wounded, those who have been captured, the families of people who have been wounded or captured or killed. To be thinking about the neshamot of the heroes who've given their lives to protect our land and to protect us. And of course, wherever we can, chesed, there are opportunities for kindness, physical kindness, material kindness, emotional kindness. And there are already various platforms and organizations channeling people's kindnesses to the people who need it most at this time, but even kindness to one another. Our own family members, our own friends need our kindness, and we need our kindness ourselves. We need to be kind to ourselves too in a time like this. But it's not just about the emotions we're meant to be feeling. It's a little more than that in terms of what is this all about? Can we make any meaning of this? Can we make any sense of this? How could this have happened? Why did this happen at this particular timing? And we need to be a little bit hard on ourselves and critical of ourselves in trying to make sense of it. We need to be kind to ourselves in moving forward in what we do about it. But in order to understand what's happened, we do need to be a little hard on ourselves. We do need to look in the mirror carefully. We do need to think about what we might have done to create the environment where such a tragedy could happen. Not that any of us are responsible for it. The wicked villains who perpetrated it are responsible for it. But in some way, each of us might have contributed towards the conditions that made it possible for them to commit the horrors that they did and that they might yet be planning. I always think in times like this of the terribly sad moments of King David, of David HaMelech, having been ousted from the throne by his own son, and his walking out of Yerushalayim into the hills, into the mountains, into the countryside. And he finds, as he gets to a place called Bachurim, V'hinei misham ish yotzei mimishpachat Beit Shaul. A man is coming out towards him, a man from the family of Shaul, his predecessor. Ushmo Shimi ben Gera yotzei yatso umekalel. His name was Shimi ben Gera. And he walked, cursing as he walked. Vayesakel ba'avanim et David. And he stoned David with stones. Such humiliation, such disgrace, such embarrassment, such sadness, such a sense of loss. And this is what Shimi said as he cursed him. Tzei ish hadamim ve'ish hablial. Get out of town, you disgusting man, you man of blood, with bloodshed. Hashiv alecha Hashem kol demei Beit Shaul, Hashem alachta tachtav. Hashem is repaying you for all the terrible things you did to Shaul, and you took his place. Vayiten Hashem et hamlucha biyad Avshalom benecha, and Hashem has given the throne over to your son, to Avshalom. V'incha bera'atcha ki ish damim ata, and you are living in your own evil wickedness because you are a man of blood. Vayomer Avishai ben Tzuria el HaMelech, and Avishai ben Tzuria, who's loyal to the king and standing by his side, says to the king, Lama yekalel hakelev hamet hazeh et adoni HaMelech. Why should we allow this dead dog to curse my master the king? E'brana va'asira et rosho. Allow me to take a step forward and decapitate him. Vayomer HaMelech, and the king said, Ma li velachem b'nei Tzuria. What are you worried about? What am I worried about? What are we worried about? Ki cho yekalel, let him curse. Ki Hashem amar lo kalel et David. Because Hashem has instructed him to curse David. Umi yomar madua asita ken, and who are we to question why? And that doesn't mean, of course, that he had a moment of prophecy and that God came to him and said, curse David. It just means that Hashem created the opportunity, created the circumstances, made it possible for Shimi ben Gera to curse David, and David recognizes that this is something that comes from God, and God is sending me a message. I need to learn something from this. This is not about Shimi. This is about me. And friends, what happened on Simchas Torah was something supernatural. It wasn't natural. It wasn't rational. And we think when we talk about a nace, we always think of a nace being something that saves us, something that is wonderful and glorious. Kriyat Yam Suf, the splitting of the Red Sea, was a nace. But it was a nace even for the Egyptians. A nace just means that shelo kederech hateva. This is something supernatural. This is something that can't be explained rationally. It's not always good. The fact that the state of Israel was so unprepared, the fact that the state of Israel has been superb at preempting little terrorist attacks, not that any terrorist attack is little, but on a scale, a single terrorist that's about to enter the country with a knife or a suicide bomber, and they get to know about it and they apprehend. We don't even know of the countless times, every week, every day probably, that the security forces prevent acts of terrorism within the state of Israel. And this, such a coordinated strike, such a well-planned, conceived of, executed and funded strike, we knew nothing about. And even as it happened, it took us so long to get to grips with what had happened. Such a complete failure. One has to say, Hashem Amar, this is something God wanted to happen. Of course, that doesn't mean that the vile terrorists are not fully morally responsible for everything they've done, and all those who support them and help them. And of course, it doesn't mean that there are people within the Israeli security system that will be held accountable for any failures that took place. That's a different matter. But to make meaning out of it, we've got to understand that this is something that Hashem facilitated, which means it's a message to us. There's something we need to learn from this. There's something we need to understand from this tragedy, because if we don't learn from it, then the lost lives of the people who have been killed and the injuries and the wounded and the abducted will have been for nothing. It's in our hands to at least make it for something and not for nothing. To make it for something that we learn from, for something that we do different in the future. And what is it? If we look at the timing, it comes at a time right after Sukot. Sukot is the festival of peace, of prosperity, of well-being. Ufros sukat shlomecha. We talk about Hashem spreading over us every night. We ask Hashem, Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, spread your sukkah of peace over us. The idea of sukkah is one of peace. And as Sukot goes out and we're celebrating Simchas Torah, that's the timing of this attack. And what does it mean? You know, when it happened, I was sitting in shul, and at that very moment that I was told about it, which was a few hours after it happened, after the beginning of it, I was learning a piece of Chofetz Chaim in his Psiche, in his opening, where he talks about the pieces of Torah we're busy with. Vayehi bishurun melech beit asef. When the Ribbono Shel Olam sits as the king of Yeshurun, of the Jewish people, that happens at a moment. Chofetz Chaim brings the Rashi that says, when at the time of Yachad Shiftei Yisrael, when the tribes of Israel are sitting together, when there is a closeness, when there is a oneness, then Vayehi Bishurun Melech, the king sits above the Jewish people and protects them and leads them. But we have to do our bit, which is Yachad Shiftei Yisrael. And Sukkot is a time of embracing. It's just a time of hugging, a time of loving. You take the lulav and the esrog and you hold them, you embrace them, you hold them tight every morning. You hold them to your chest, you put them out, you bring them back. And what are the arba minim? What is the lulav and esrog? We embrace ourselves, the diverse parts of our own personality, our heads and our hearts and our eyes and our mouths, all the different senses we use in life, we integrate into one, and we hug it and we hold it as something precious, one integrated power, which is me. And we also think of it as Klal Yisrael, the people who have Torah and mitzvot, and the people who are frum, they have mitzvot, but they're not scholarly, and the people who are scholarly, but they don't do much good in the world, and the people who do neither, they're not scholarly, they don't learn the Torah, nor do they do much good in the world, the different species, and we hold them together, we hug them, we love them, and we sit in the sukkah. Sukkah is a mitzvah where everybody sitting in the sukkah is doing the same mitzvah just by sitting there. You can be an ignoramus and you can be a talmid chacham, two people sitting next to each other, and they're performing the same mitzvah. They're embraced by the sukkah. The sukkah embraces Klal Yisrael. It embraces the Jewish people. It embraces each of our families. Sukkah is a time of protection and embracing and love. And that's not how we've been as a nation over the past year or so. And again, I don't want to point a finger at anybody, at ourselves or anybody else, and say, you are responsible, I am responsible. It's not about responsible. It's just about trying to examine, is there anything we need to do different going forward? And of course, we are a nation of divergent opinions and divergent types of people. That's the Arba meaning. We are 4 different species and many more. We are the Shivtei Kol, we are the 12 tribes of Yisrael, the sons of Yaakov. Each one is different. Each has a different culture. Each one has a different worldview within the overarching worldview of the Torah and of the Jewish people. But we're different. And we're going to have differences of opinion, and that is fine. The whole Talmud is made up of differences of opinion, of arguments, of challenges. That is fine. We can challenge each other. There's nothing wrong with that. We can disagree with one another. We can disagree strongly with one another. We can disagree with the government of Israel. We can disagree with a particular party in Israel. We can disagree with particular viewpoints and policies of the state of Israel. Maybe even we can be intolerant and hateful of certain actions that certain people do. But you can't hate Klal Yisrael. You can undermine the government in democratic ways in order to bring about a change of government if that's what you want to do. A system of democracy allows you to do that. You can challenge the government. You can disagree with the government. But you can't undermine Klal Yisrael. And when you start undermining Klal Yisrael, that's an act of treason. When you start providing the enemies of the Jewish people with the ammunition with which to attack us, when you start providing them with the material with which to hate us, when you start providing them with the reasons to consider us weak and ineffectual, that's treasonous. You want to disagree with policies of the state of Israel, that's fine, but to take your money out of Israel and weaken Israel, not just weaken the government, weaken the people of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael, to talk about it in a way that weakens it, to challenge the value system of Eretz Yisrael, to undermine, to talk about it in a way that is a chilul Hashem in the eyes of the nations of the world, thereby weakening everything we stand for. These are things we shouldn't be doing. And I'm not only talking about one side in what has been happening. Every single one of us play a part in that. If we are part of the yeshiva community, part of the Torah community, whether the Hasidic community or the Lithuanian community, part of the Haredi community, and our life is around Torah, but we need to be able to live in a way where we understand and express the fact that the success of this land in which we live and learn Torah, in which we're free to do so, and Torah can flourish, has been made successful by a partnership of many, many different people. And that there are people who have no part directly in Torah who make it possible. There are people who build the businesses in Israel that enable an economy to support Torah. There are people who serve in the army to protect Israel for those who are learning Torah and everybody else. There are people who pay the taxes that keep the country going, that make it possible. And we as B'nai Torah need to demonstrate our gratitude to those people. We should be able to go up to strangers in the street, at the bus stops, in the restaurants, wherever, and say thank you. I appreciate what you're doing to make my life possible, to make the life of Torah that I live possible. No, we shouldn't be looking down at them and despising them in any way. On the contrary, We need to be showing them respect and admiration and appreciation, even if we disagree with them, even if we're intolerant of some of the things they say and do, but the fact still remains. Their effort and their work and their Mesiras Nefesh is part of why we're able to do what we're able to do. And if we're on the other side, if we're a secular Jew, we need to understand that the heart of Eretz Yisrael is the Torah we live by, the values we live by. What makes us different is our Jewishness, and not to attack the Jewishness. You might not want to live it yourself. That's fine. That's your right. You might not want it imposed upon you. That's fine, and that's your right too. But don't attack it. Don't diminish it. Don't demean it. It's the heart of Am Yisrael. And while you're free to challenge people, individuals, policies, attitudes, you're not free to attack and to undermine and to challenge the existence of the Jewish people. And if you're one of those people in the Dati Leumi group where you're bridging both of these worlds, you're serving in the army, working in industry, paying taxes, learning Torah, living a life of Torah and mitzvot, how one has to be able to bridge those two and show enormous kavod, enormous honor and dignity to those who are studying Torah full-time and to those who are supporting the country full-time, and to realize that this lulav and esrog, these arba minim which we embrace, we need all of them. We need every one of them to hold together and embrace and honor and respect and treat with such dignity. Each of us needs to know that. And if we're Jews living in the Gola, if we're living in the United States or in England or Europe or South Africa or Australia or anywhere else, we need to be very careful too. Once again, we have a right to disagree with the government of Israel, to disagree with policies of Israel, to talk about that disagreement, to challenge, but never to do anything that runs the risk of undermining the essence, the soul, the heart of Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael. And we have not been careful with that. We have been so obsessively preoccupied in running down the country and running down our people, our nation, that we've not been able to take notice of the things that need to be taken notice of. The real purpose of having an Eretz Yisrael, a place for Jewish people to live Jewish lives and to live those Jewish lives with the Torah and the Avodah and the Gemilut Chasadim, the study of Torah, the service of God and the kindness one to another. That's what we need to be doing. That's how we need to be living. And we haven't been focused on that. And our professionals haven't been able to be focused on our true enemies because they look at each other as enemies. Your enemies are never within Am Yisrael. And we see how magnificently the Jewish people comes together when there is tragedy like we've had in these last few days. And the Jewish people comes together because there are no enemies within. The enemies are only without. And if we insist on seeing enemies within, we will miss the enemies from without. And that's the message that we need to learn and take forward. If we see enemies within, if we see enemies among our friends, if we see enemies among our colleagues, if we see enemies within the nation of Israel, we will miss the true threats and we will be taken by surprise over and over again until we understand and we're careful with what we do and we're careful about how we treat each other and how we treat Klal Yisrael. The Maharal says in Netzach Yisrael, Perek Lamed Hey, that a sukkah in a certain way is more permanent than a binyan, than a bayit, than a building. Now, of course, we've got to live temporarily in the sukkah, but that very nature of the temporariness of the sukkah is also the key to its permanence, because he explains, if you have a building and the building is destroyed, you don't rebuild it. It's gone, it's finished, you build a new one. But the sukkah is made to be taken apart. So when you disassemble your sukkah and you reassemble it the next year, you're reassembling the same sukkah. So there's a continuity about Sukot that there isn't about a bayit, about a building. And that's why we talk about this as sukat shalom. That's the idea of the sukkah being a sukat shalom, because our sukat shalom was violently disrupted this Simchas Torah. It was disgustingly, brutally, horrifyingly disrupted. The sukat shalom was broken. But that doesn't mean that it's broken forever. That means we've got to take the pieces and put them together again and build the Sukat Shalom again. Not a new Sukat Shalom, the same Sukat Shalom. It's a Sukat Shalom of Hashem's blessing, of Fros Aleinu Sukat Shlomecha. We've got to re-access the peace that Hashem blesses us with. We've got to be able to hug the Arba Minim. We've got to be able to hug the different Jews that we are and hold them close This is a time to hug the members of your family, to embrace them and to love them. This is a time to hug and embrace the people in your community. This is a time to hug and embrace the people that you don't even have that much in common with. Other than that, they're part of the Matmonim. They're part of the Jewish people. They contribute to the success of what we've got in each one in whatever way they do. To appreciate that for them, to honor them for that for them, and to embrace and hold them dear and close for that. That's what we need to be able to do going forward. This is a time to overflow with love. This is a time to overflow with embracing, with acceptance of one another, and to understand and appreciate how we cannot build this sukat shalom, the sukkah of peace, of Hashem's blessing. We cannot do it alone. One group cannot do it. The Haredim alone cannot do it. The yeshiva people alone cannot do it. The Chilonim, the non-religious people alone cannot do it. The Mesoratim, the traditional people alone cannot. Nobody can do it alone. We need everybody for this. And we need to appreciate and love everybody for it. And if as we heal ourselves through this terrible time, this terribly difficult time, we allow ourselves to come to terms with it, to understand it, to be there empathetically for the people who are suffering, and in some way we're all suffering in this together, to be able to look forward and say, what do we do differently going forward? What we do differently is to understand that never again will we look for our enemies within the Jewish people. Never again will we look at any other Jew as our enemy. That always we will look at every Jew who's playing a contributive part, even if it's a part very different from our own. We will look at him with appreciation and gratitude and honor, because he contributes, or she contributes, to making possible the magnificence of what we have in Eretz Yisrael and in Am Yisrael. And if we can make that change, then I don't want to say it will be been worthwhile, because what on earth could make this worthwhile? But at least the terrible deaths and the wounds, and the hurt and the loss, and the abductions will not have been for nothing. Because we will have taken a lesson from this. We will have understood this was Lamala min HaTeva. This was a message from Hashem. This was not something that anybody understands. The whole world is asking, how did this happen? How could this happen? There isn't an explanation for it other than to understand. Hashem is telling us it's just time to take yourselves in hand. It's time to treat this land I've given you differently. It's time to teach this nation, to treat this nation I've given you differently. It's time to treat one another differently. And it's time to treat yourself differently. To treat yourself with the honor and the dignity that you deserve as part of this magnificent nation, as part of this gift of Hashem to the nations of the world, this Am Yisrael, this Am Segula, this precious nation of which you and I, each of us, are a part. To love and appreciate ourselves, to love and appreciate our families, to love and appreciate one another, and to truly appreciate the value of Am Yisrael. May Hashem comfort those who have had losses, heal those who have been wounded, return to us those who have been abducted, and heal all of our broken hearts, bringing us a future of ahavo ve'achvo, of love and brotherhood, of simcha, of happiness and joy, and of shalom.